If you are shopping for a new lens this year, stop before you buy anything on this list. Some of these lenses are old designs still wearing premium price tags. Others are cheap enough to tempt you, and expensive enough in the long run to make you buy twice. You are watching Alt Buzz Lenses, and if honest lens buying guides are your thing, subscribe now, because these next 10 choices could save or cost you real money. At number 10, we have the Sony E PZ 16 to 50mm lens, a compact travel companion that quietly overstays its welcome once you buy it on its own. Inside a camera kit, this lens makes sense. It retracts down to nothing, it powers its own zoom for casual video, and its stabilization earns its keep on bodies that lack in body correction. For a beginner who just wants something small in the bag, none of that is a lie. Sitting at roughly $348 as a standalone purchase, it asks upgrade money for what is essentially entry-level glass. But pull it off the kit shelf and price it separately, and the story changes. Its slow, shifting aperture limits low light work and flattens subject separation, which means you are paying upgrade money for kit-level results. The Sigma 18 to 50mm, with its constant f2.8 aperture, is the more honest upgrade for indoor shooting, portraits, and events. Even though it costs more, closer to $659, and drops the power zoom convenience entirely. Its slightly larger barrel also means it will not disappear into a bag the way the Sony does, something worth weighing if travel weight matters more to you than aperture speed. Keep the Sony if it arrived free with your camera, or if compactness is genuinely the deciding factor in how you shoot. Do not mistake it for the lens your system actually needs. The Sony asks buyers to pay upgrade money for kit-level glass. Nikon's next lens charges a different kind of premium, this time for 2/3 of a stop. At number 9, we have the Nikon AF-S NIKKOR 50mm f1.4 lens, a faster 50 that has quietly stopped being the sensible 50. There is nothing wrong with wanting f1.4. Faster glass has always felt more serious, more cinematic, more capable in a dim room. The trouble is what Nikon charges for that extra light, when the difference between f1.4 and f1.8 is often smaller in practice than it looks on paper. New, this lens sits close to $400, a number that gets harder to defend every year. The used market grows around it. The f1.8 version covers portraits, family shots, travel, and everyday photography for a fraction of the price, often found refurbished for around $176, freeing up your budget for a second lens entirely. Rendering is where the two genuinely diverge, and photographers who have shot both will tell you the wider aperture version has a character of its own that some simply prefer regardless of price. Autofocus behavior on the older, faster design also shows its age slightly wider open, something worth testing before committing to a used copy. The faster prime still has its place, but only when a clean used copy sits close in price to its cheaper sibling, or when its particular rendering is something you have already fallen in love with. New, at full price, it is a hard number to defend. The f1.4 becomes interesting when its used price nearly matches the f1.8, not when it costs double. Sony's inexpensive 50 is chasing a similar problem, except its competition is newer, and it arrived almost overnight. At number 8, we have the Sony FE 50mm f1.8 lens, once the obvious budget choice for full-frame shooters, now just one option among several. This lens earned its reputation honestly. For years, it was the easy answer for anyone stepping into full-frame Sony and wanting a fast, affordable prime. First-party support, a familiar mount, a dependable aperture, all of that still holds true today, and it still sells for right around $200. What has changed is everything around it. Third-party glass like the Viltrox 50mm f2 Air arrives at nearly the same price, close to $199, with a modern stepping motor and a build made with video shooters in mind. The Sony remains roughly a third of a stop faster, and some photographers will always prefer staying inside the first-party ecosystem, especially if firmware quirks make them nervous about compatibility down the line. Autofocus noise is another quiet factor here. Newer stepping motor designs tend to run noticeably quieter for video work, which matters if you are recording audio on camera. Availability also favors the newer option right now, with fresh stock consistently easier to find than a good used Sony copy. But calling it the automatic choice in 2026 ignores just how crowded this price point has become. Sony's inexpensive 50 is surrounded now, not because it got worse, but because the market got better. Canon's next lens has a harder problem. Its design has simply gotten old, while its price tag refuses to notice. At number 7, we have the Canon EF 50mm f1.4 USM lens, a design with decades behind it, still asking for a price that assumes it is new. For a long stretch, this was Canon's standard fast 50, and it earned that trust. The aperture still delivers, the rendering still has admirers, and plenty of photographers built entire portfolios around it. None of that disappeared with time, and even now it sits close to $449, where stock remains. What did change is the competition around it, and the honest truth that its autofocus mechanism and optical design were built for a different era of cameras. The f1.8 STM sibling costs a fraction of the price, around $170, weighs less, focuses with a modern stepping motor, and adapts cleanly to Canon's mirrorless bodies through a simple mount adapter. Adapting the older f1.4 to RF bodies works fine mechanically, but it does nothing to modernize the autofocus motor underneath, so the same hunting behavior in low light follows it across systems. Build quality is one area where the older lens still has an edge. Its metal mount and more substantial barrel feeling noticeably sturdier than the newer budget option. The f1.4 remains worth chasing at a fair used price, or if its specific look is something you already know you want. At full retail, though, the market has simply moved past it. At a sensible used price, this lens still has a place. At full price, there are too many better decisions available. The next lens on this list adds a new variable to the equation: the name printed on the barrel. At number 6, we have the Zeiss Touit 32mm f1.8 for Fujifilm X, a prestige prime facing a more practical native rival. There is a real argument for this lens, and it deserves to be made honestly. Some photographers genuinely prefer how Zeiss glass renders light and color, and that preference is not something a spec sheet can argue against. 32mm sits naturally as a standard prime on Fujifilm's crop sensor bodies, and the badge carries real weight for a reason, currently priced around $609. But an older autofocus generation can feel noticeably less refined on a modern mirrorless body, and the Fujifilm XF 35mm f2, weather-sealed, compact, and considerably cheaper at roughly $399, competes directly in one of Fujifilm's strongest focal lengths. The native lens also integrates with Fujifilm's own aperture ring and control layout in a way the Zeiss, designed around a slightly different control philosophy, simply cannot match. Weather resistance is another quiet advantage for the Fujifilm option, useful for anyone shooting travel or outdoor work where the Zeiss offers no such ceiling at all. Buy the Zeiss because you have studied its rendering and want it specifically. Do not buy it because the name alone feels like justification. Buy the Zeiss for how it renders, not for what the badge alone seems to promise. Nikon's next lens has a simpler issue. It works beautifully inside a kit, and struggles the moment it stands alone. At number 5, we have the NIKKOR Z 24 to 50mm lens, a lens built to be small, and priced as though smallness were the only thing that mattered. There is something genuinely appealing about a full-frame zoom this compact. It retracts for travel, it keeps a mirrorless kit light, and starting at 24mm gives it real usefulness on the wide end. None of that is an exaggeration, and it currently runs close to $447 on its own. The trouble begins at 50mm, where the range simply stops, right when a photographer might want it to keep going. For roughly $100 more, closer to $550, the 24 to 105 millimeter version keeps that same wide end and adds real reach for portraits, travel, and everyday shooting, at the cost of extra size and a noticeably heavier barrel. The slower variable aperture on both versions means neither is a low-light solution, so buyers hoping this range solves indoor or evening shooting will be disappointed either way. Retractable collapsing designs like this one also demand a bit more care in daily use, since forgetting to extend the barrel before shooting is a common early mistake. The smaller lens still earns its place inside a discounted kit, or for someone who already owns fast primes and just wants a lightweight walk-around option. Treat this lens as a portability choice that belongs in a kit, not as the obvious upgrade for a full Nikon system. Canon, it turns out, built almost the identical dilemma. At number 4, we have the Canon RF 24 to 50 millimeter lens, Canon's version of the same compact compromise, wearing a different badge. Its stabilization genuinely helps on bodies without in-body correction, and its lightweight makes it a natural companion for smaller mirrorless cameras like the entry-level R8. Photographers who value a minimal kit have real reasons to like this lens, which sits around $350 where stock remains available. The range, though, tells the same story as its Nikon counterpart. 24 to 50 millimeters can feel restrictive fast, and spending roughly $100 more, near $459, on the 24 to 105 millimeter version doubles the telephoto reach while keeping the same wide end, making it a far more convincing single lens solution for travel and family photography. Stock status is worth checking directly with Canon before buying, since this particular lens has seen inconsistent availability through certain retailers recently. The extra reach on the alternative also means fewer lens swaps on a hike or at an event, which matters more than it sounds once you are actually out shooting. The smaller lens remains sensible inside a heavily discounted kit, or for a photographer building a bag of primes around it. Inside the right kit, this lens makes sense. On its own, at full price, it offers too little range for what it costs. Fujifilm's next lens offers considerably more and asks for nearly $1,000 in return. At number 3, we have the Fujifilm XF 18 to 135 millimeter lens, a capable all-in-one zoom, carrying a price that no longer matches the market around it. This lens earns its reputation the hard way, through weather resistance, in-lens stabilization, and native Fujifilm handling that feels immediately familiar. For travel and outdoor photography, that range covers an enormous amount of ground, and none of its strengths are exaggerated. It currently sells for close to $999. What has shifted is the competition. The Tamron 18 to 300 millimeter lens costs roughly $300 less, closer to $699, stretches dramatically farther, and still includes stabilization, even if its handling and construction cannot fully match the native experience. The Tamron's weather resistance, while present, is not built to the same standard as Fujifilm's own sealing, something worth knowing if you regularly shoot in genuinely harsh conditions. Native aperture control is another subtle difference, the Fujifilm working seamlessly with the body's physical dials in a way third-party glass sometimes does not replicate perfectly. Close focusing distance also favors the Fujifilm slightly, useful for anyone who likes to shoot detail shots while traveling. The Fujifilm remains the better choice when native control and weather sealing genuinely matter more to you than raw reach. Capability was never the issue with this lens. At nearly $1,000, capability alone stopped being enough. Sony's next lens creates an even bigger gap between what you pay and what a third-party alternative can offer. If you have made it this far, you already know these calls are not simple yes or no answers. That is exactly why Alt Buzz Lenses exists. So if you have not subscribed yet, now is a good moment, because the next two entries are where the price gaps get genuinely dramatic. At number 2, we have the Sony FE 70 to 300 mm G lens, a respectable telephoto standing next to an alternative that costs roughly a quarter of its price. Nothing about this lens is a poor purchase in isolation. It stabilizes well at long focal lengths, integrates seamlessly with Sony autofocus, and carries the build quality its G badge promises. For a photographer who shoots telephoto often, every one of those advantages is real and worth paying for. And the roughly $1,498 price tag reflects genuine engineering, not just a badge. The question is, what happens when a photographer only reaches for a lens like this occasionally? The Tamron 70-300mm covers the same essential range for a fraction of the cost, often found near $399 and lower during promotions, staying lightweight and travel-friendly, though it drops in lens stabilization entirely and leans on the camera body instead. Autofocus tracking on moving subjects is another area where the Sony's dedicated motor design shows a real edge, something wildlife and sports shooters will notice more than casual travelers ever would. Weight is worth mentioning too, the Tamron's lighter barrel making a real difference on a long day of walking with a camera around your neck. For anyone shooting mostly outdoors in daylight, without a body that needs that extra stabilization, the Tamron closes the gap fast. This is a respectable lens for the right photographer. For the occasional telephoto shooter, it is simply more than the moment calls for. What comes next is the lens that started this whole conversation. At number 1, we have the Canon RF 75-300mm lens, cheap enough to tempt almost anyone, and limited enough to quietly cost you twice. It is easy to see the appeal. A first-party Canon telephoto at close to $220 feels like an open door into wildlife, aircraft, and outdoor sport photography, and in good daylight, it can genuinely deliver usable results. That much deserves to be said honestly. The absence of optical stabilization becomes the real issue the moment light fades or focal length stretches, especially on Canon bodies without in-body correction of their own, where handheld shots at longer reach start slipping out of focus. The Canon RF 100-400mm solves that with real stabilization and a faster, quieter motor. But it costs several times more, close to $750, and is not a realistic first purchase for every budget. Basic construction on the cheaper lens is another factor worth naming plainly. Its entry-level autofocus motor and build simply were not designed for the demands of serious action or wildlife tracking. Close focusing performance also favors the pricier option, useful if macro-style detail shots are part of what draws you to telephoto work in the first place. The cheaper lens remains a fair choice when the budget genuinely cannot move, and daylight shooting is the plan. This lens opens the door to telephoto photography for very little money. For a photographer growing serious about wildlife or sport, that low price can quietly become the first payment toward the lens they should have saved for from the start. None of these lenses stopped taking good photographs when the year changed. Only the market around them did. Some now ask too much, some offer too little, and a few only make sense used, discounted, or bundled into a kit. Which one on this list do you still stand by? And which one taught you the hard way? Tell us below and subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses for the next honest guide.